Morning all, and we are going to start with Selenium tutorials starting today. Uh, let's quickly see what all topics we are planning to cover. So we are going to see what is a Selenium architecture, a very brief introduction theoretically what Selenium architecture is. Then we will see how do I create a driver so that we can launch a browser. We will see some commands related to the browser, and we will also see some commands related to the navigation. So we have to move forward, backward, or whatever it requires that we need to perform as navigation on the browser. We would be covering that. Apart from that, we would also cover some of the you know elements with which we would be interacting. So it would be input box or button, image, link, checkbox, radio button. So this is what I plan to cover today, and let's see how it goes. All right. So having said that, let's start with Selenium WebDriver architecture. So here is this one very simple to understand diagram that I found on the internet for understanding the Selenium suite. So Selenium is nothing but a suite of web automation open source tool which helps us in automating uh, the user interaction on a particular browser, and we can use that to automate our manual test cases. Okay, so Selenium first started as a Chrome or a Firefox extension. It was called as Selenium IDE. So using that extension, we would be able to record all the operations that the user performs on a particular browser, and then that recording used to get saved, and then we could play it again so that we would simulate the user interaction that we have recorded. So it was a very simple record and playback mechanism that Selenium IDE provided. Then came Selenium Remote Control and WebDriver. So a combination of both of these, I mean, they got integrated, and that's how Selenium WebDriver 2 came into existence. And eventually, over a period of time, the latest version of Selenium WebDriver is Selenium 4. Okay, and there's also one more component of Selenium suite which is called as Selenium Grid. It is used for executing test cases parallelly, right? So we would not really go into Selenium Grid at the moment. We would focus our training related to Selenium WebDriver. Okay, so with this, let's jump into Eclipse. I hope you all have downloaded Selenium Java jar files, which is very necessary for you to start working on Selenium. So currently on Eclipse, I have created this one project called a Selenium tutorial, and I have associated the Selenium Java jar files under reference libraries, right? So as you can see, all these jar files are now associated with this project, meaning I would be able to use Selenium commands in my Java project, right? So if you haven't done this, I would suggest you to download those jar files on the internet. It's freely available. And how do you associate those jar files to your Selenium project is by right clicking your project, go to build path, configure build path. Under libraries tab, click on class path and click on add external jar files. And here, as you can see, this is the Selenium Java 4.9.1, folder that I have downloaded. So I have selected all the files, all the zip files that you can see here, as well as inside the lib, the library folder. I have selected all of them. I've clicked on open. So I would see all those getting added under this class path. And then finally you have to click on apply and close. So that's how you would associate all those jar files to your project. So once that is done, we can start using Selenium commands for our automation. So first thing, as I mentioned, we have to create a driver for the browser that we want to use for launching the application, or performing our testing, right? So how do I initialize the browser driver object? Okay, so I will tell you this. First of all, I have to mention uh, where is my Chrome driver, or whichever browser I want to use. Where is that driver you know downloaded on my machine? Okay, so if you are using one second, guys. Yeah, so if you are using a Chrome driver, a Chrome browser, you have to download Google Chrome driver. If you are using a Firefox browser, you have to download Gecko driver and things like that. Okay, so I personally use Google Chrome. I'm pretty comfortable using that, so I would use the same in this tutorial as well. Okay, so first I have to mention where is that Chrome driver which I have downloaded, where is it located? So for that I have to write this statement: system dot set property. Here you have to mention webdriver dot chrome dot driver. Okay, and then here you have to mention the exe file where you have stored that particular driver. Okay, so for me, I have stored it over here. This is the path, Chrome driver. Okay, so I will say, I'll copy paste this over here, and I will press semicolon. Okay, so I've set the path of this Chrome driver. Now I will create an instance of this web driver by saying WebDriver driver equal to new Chrome driver. All right, so I need to import certain packages so that I would be able to use this. So I would probably go ahead and use this. Okay, yeah. So I've kind of created an instance of WebDriver, right? So now using this driver, I would be able to use the methods related to the browser by just pressing this dot, and you can see there is a list of methods that are available for this WebDriver. Okay, so we will see some of them today, and the first one would be driver dot, I would say, manage dot window dot maximize. Okay, so what this is going to do, it is going to open a Chrome browser and it is going to maximize the window, right? Then I would say driver dot go, driver dot get, and if you can see, this get method accepts one string variable, which is actually nothing but the URL where you want to navigate, or the URL which you want to launch, right? So I would say I would use this uh, one application. It's actually a demo application. I will show you that, which is very useful for practicing different objects for Selenium automation. So as you can see here, this is a sample URL, correct? So I will just copy this. It's a login page basically, right? So yeah, let me mention the URL over here. Fine. And let me execute this. Or before that, I can also say driver dot close. So as the name suggests, it is going to close that particular browser which you have opened after whatever activities you have mentioned prior to that is completed. Okay, so it's a very simple, you know, piece of code. We have initialized the WebDriver. We have maximized the Chrome browser, and then we have launched this particular URL, and finally we are going to close that browser as well. Okay, so with this we will execute this program and see how it works. So the browser has been launched, it has been maximized, it has navigated to this particular URL and it has closed it. Okay, so if you see the console, you see some socket exception, but you can ignore that. It has nothing which actually affects our execution. So this piece of code has worked absolutely fine. Okay, now there is also one more method which says driver dot quit. Okay, so this basically works a little similar to dot close. So the difference between dot close and dot quit is that the dot close method will close the browser which is currently opened, or the browser where the focus is currently active. Okay, so let's say there are you have launched a particular application, you have clicked on some link or a button which actually opens up a new tab or a new window, a browser window, and then if you say driver dot close, it is going to close the window or the tab which is currently in focus. Okay, so it will close this tab only, whereas the primary tab is still open. Okay, whereas driver.quit would actually close all the browsers that have been opened using this Selenium code. Okay, and another uh, difference between driver.close and driver.quit is that driver.quit would actually terminate the reference of this particular object, meaning after driver.quit I would not be able to use this driver methods without reinitializing this object. Okay, so you have to be very careful in using driver.quit. Generally in the automation framework, driver.quit is used as a the very last thing in the execution. So when all the test cases have been executed and everything you know is completed, then we use this particular method so that it terminates the instance of the driver that we have created. Okay, so this is the difference between driver.close and driver.quit. Then there are certain other methods as well which are useful, like driver.getTitle, driver.getCurrentUrl, right? So we will see that as well. So let's say there is a test case which says uh, the page or the application which is loaded should have a title which which says whatever XYZ. So in this case it is demo QA, right? So if I want to check whether the title of this particular page which I have launched is demo QA or not, you can make use of this method. Okay, so I would say string ACT title, which means actual title, and I will say driver dot get title. Okay, so get title returns a string variable or string value, so that is why I have stored it in a string variable called as ACT title. And let's say there is the expected title is demo QA. All right, and I say if actual title dot equals ignore case expected title. If this is true, then you print something like title matches the expected value. Okay, else you can say title does not match the expected value, right? So this is what the get title would do, and we would also have a test case, probably which says that let's take this example of when you click on login button, the landing page that comes up, it should have some URL which is what we expect. So if you want to know that after clicking on login button we are getting navigated to the expected URL or not, you can also do that basis of this method which says driver dot get current URL. Okay, so at the moment what I'm just doing is that I'm just printing the URL value here. Okay, but in real time, you probably might have to validate something like this, what I mentioned after clicking on login button, what is the URL we are navigated to or redirected to. Okay, so we will see both of these methods, driver dot get title and driver dot get current URL. All right, so let me execute this. Okay, so let's see what it has printed. So it says title matches the expected value, right? Because demo QA is the expected value and the actual value is also demo QA, right? So this is working fine. And the current URL is https demoqa.com/login, correct? So this works fine. And with this, we have covered this browser commands which we plan to cover. Then let's come to this navigation commands. Okay, so as the name suggests, it is actually navigating to different pages within the you know browser based on our browser history. So for example, let's say after we launch this particular URL, I want to navigate to a different URL, and then we will see, based on our browser history, whether we can navigate back and forth using the dot back and dot forward method of driver. So for that, I would first say driver dot navigate dot to, and it will navigate to a different URL on this particular website, demo QA. There is a page for select hyphen menu. Okay, so this navigate.to works exactly the same way as this .get method. So .get method launches a particular URL, and .navigate.to also launches a specific URL. So it navigates or redirects us to the URL which we have mentioned here. All right. And what I'll do here is I would add a wait, a hard-coded wait using thread.sleep method, which accepts input in milliseconds. So here I've mentioned 5000 milliseconds. Basically, it means that the execution will wait at this particular line for 5 seconds. Why I have added this wait is because after I launch this particular URL, it takes some time for the page to load, right? So I will wait for 5 seconds, hoping that this page would load within that time, and then I will navigate to this other URL which I have mentioned here. Okay, so although this is not the best way to handle synchronization, but for the time being, I'm using this hard-coded wait. We will see in detail the different optimum way of handling synchronization using fluent wait, explicit wait, in our future sessions. So after I launch the second URL, I would again wait for 5 seconds, you know hoping that the page loads within that time frame. All right, and now what I'll do is let me just uncomment or let me just comment out the lines which I don't need for now. Okay, and I would say I would print what is the current URL after I have navigated to this second URL. All right, and I would also do it here. So first I would launch demo QA login, wait for 5 seconds for the page to load. I will print what is the URL that it has, launched. Then I would navigate to the second URL, wait for 5 seconds for the page to load, and then again, print this get current URL value. Now what I'll do is I would say driver dot navigate. This time I will say back, meaning from this particular select menu URL, I will go back to my previous page in the browser history, which was nothing but demo QA login, correct? I will wait for 5 seconds again, and then I'll print the current URL in that case. Okay, so we have seen driver dot navigate to method, we have seen driver dot back method. Now we will see driver dot navigate dot forward. Okay, so forward means from login it will again come back or come forward rather to select menu page. Okay, again we'll wait for 5 seconds and print the URL. Once this is done, I would then say driver dot navigate dot refresh. This would basically simulate the F5 key press. The page would refresh once again, and then I would say first page has been refreshed, and finally I will again print the URL. Okay, and yeah, so I think this is perfect, and we will execute this now. So it has launched the browser, it has navigated to login using the get method, wait for 5 seconds. It has then navigated to select hyphen menu page. It will wait for 5 seconds. It has come back to login now, as you can see. Right, it will wait for 5 seconds. It has again now gone forward to select hyphen menu, and now it has refreshed and it has completed the execution. So you see, guys, how it has navigated back and forth and also refreshed the page. So let's see this as a confirmation. So first, using the get method, we had launched this login URL. Then using the navigate.to method, we had navigated to select hyphen menu. Then using navigate dot back, we came back to login page. Then using navigate dot forward, we went forward to select hyphen menu again. Then we pressed, when we simulated the F5 key press by using navigate dot refresh, we printed this line which says page has been refreshed, and then we also got the URL after the page has been refreshed, which was nothing but select hyphen menu. Correct? So these are different methods that are available for navigation of the browser page. All right. Now we will see some web elements which we can use for testing. So let's come back to the login page itself. Uh, yeah. So this is the login page, right? So whatever objects that you see on a browser or a page, you know, technically you can refer this as a text box, a button, right? A label, etc. But for Selenium, it it refers to all the objects inside the browser as a web element. So how does it, you know, identify a particular object uniquely in order to interact with it is based on the attributes that we provide to Selenium to identify that object uniquely. I'll tell you how. So let's say on this particular page, if I want to know what is the unique attribute of this particular object, it is an edit box, but in Selenium, for Selenium, it is just a web element, right? So if Selenium wants to identify this web element or this object uniquely, I need to provide some unique attributes of this object to Selenium. So how do I find the attributes of this object? So I need to just right click and click on inspect. It will take you to this HTML, page source code, right? And it will highlight you the exact line inside that HTML which is referring to the object which we have inspected. Okay. So here it says this particular object is actually an input HTML tag object. It has this attribute which says autocomplete and the value is off. There is another attribute called as placeholder. The value is username. Another attribute called as type, which has the value text. There is another attribute called as ID, which has the value username, and so on and so forth. Okay. So now, out of these 3 to 4 attributes, we have to figure out what could be the attribute which would have a very unique value only specific for this object, right? So to do that, there are various ways by which we can, provide these attributes for Selenium to identify this object. So those are called as locators. Okay, so there is ID locator, name locator, class locator, XPath locator, CSS locator, right? So we will see that in detail in the subsequent session. But for time being, I would say I think this attribute ID has this value called as username, which is unique. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll copy this value. I will press Control F. Okay, and I will see whether this value is unique or not. So now it says there are 4 matches with this value. Okay, so it is not a unique one. So let me try to add something over here. So I would say / twice. I would say input. Okay, and I would say @id, which is the attribute name, equal to, in single quotes, the value, and I will close the square bracket. So now, as you can see, I have got this as one of one, meaning this is a very unique attribute value that we have given, and it is also highlighting that particular HTML line in yellow, means that this is what is identified based on the value that I have provided over here. So what I've done here is basically I've used a concept called as XPath. Okay, so XPath is nothing but a path of this particular HTML object or HTML tag, you know, inside this entire HTML file, right? So if I have to search for a particular HTML, you know, tag in this entire HTML document, I can either use, you know, a relative XPath. So this is a relative XPath. Okay. So let me just show you. So this is the relative XPath. I've used two forward slashes. I've mentioned the tag name, which is input in this case. I've opened the square bracket. I've mentioned the attribute which I want to use, which is ID in this case. Okay, so @attribute name, which is ID, equal to, in single quote, the attribute value, which is username in this case, and then I will close the square bracket. So this is basically called as a relative XPath. Okay, so two forward slashes in the beginning indicates that I am going to write a relative XPath. Okay, now let's say I want to use a absolute XPath. So I can just right click that HTML line and I would say copy full XPath. Okay, and I would say I will paste it over here, and you see the full XPath. The full XPath also identifies this object uniquely, one of one. But the challenge here is that you see the entire hierarchy, so it starts with the root tag, which is HTML. Then inside HTML, there is a tag called as body. Then inside body, there is an HTML tag called as div. And the second div is where it traverses. Then inside that there is another div, and so on and so forth, and finally it reaches this HTML input tag. Okay, so this also would work absolutely fine, but the challenge here is that, let's say tomorrow the developer removes certain tags in between or adds certain tags in between, then this entire path which you have copied will no longer would work, because you have copied a absolute XPath, the full XPath, which might not work if there is any change done by the developer, in the arrangement or in the location of that particular object. So it is always recommended that you use a relative XPath with the syntax that I just explained, right? So it, no matter where the developer places this object tomorrow, if the attribute name is ID and if the attribute value is username, it will still identify that object no matter where it is placed. Okay, so yeah, so what I'll do is I will now go to my Eclipse. Okay, let me let me comment out things that I don't want, and I would say driver dot. Okay, so inside this browser I want to find a particular element, right? So there is this method called as find element, which accepts certain attributes, okay, and it returns a object of web element, okay. So now what I'll do is driver dot find element by dot. So now you see there are these locators, what I was just mentioning some time back. There is an ID locator, there is a class name locator, link text locator, name locator, partial link text locator, tag name, and XPath. Okay, so for now, I will use XPath locator. We will see all other locators in detail, as and when we progress in this session. And inside this XPath, in double quotes, I will mention the relative XPath that we have written. Okay, and since this is returning a web element object, right, I have to save this to a web element object, let's say user ID. Okay, and let me import this package web element. All right, so now what I've done is I've asked Selenium driver to find an element using the XPath, which is this. If it is able to find the object, store it in a web element object by the name obj user id. All right, so now this obj user id, which acts as a web element, now will have certain methods that we can use. So we can use clear, we can use click, there are a list of methods that we can use. Okay, since I mentioned that Selenium doesn't make any differentiation whether that particular object is an edit box or a drop down or a link or whatnot, right? It identifies all objects as web element, right? So it is up to us to understand, using our common sense, what would be the method that would be useful to interact with an edit box, correct? So if you see here, there is this method called as send keys. Okay, so the send keys would basically simulate our key press. Okay, so whatever keys we press, right, it would simulate that. And I would say here, I would pass a user ID as user123, and I will press semicolon. All right. So for an input box or an edit box or a text box, whatever you may want to call, if you want to pass any value to it, this is the method that you can use, dot send keys. Okay. So now let's quickly also identify this password edit box. So again, it highlights this, and I would say here there is this ID attribute which has a unique value, I feel, which is password. Okay, so now what I'll do is I would say driver dot find element by dot, this time I would say ID. Okay, there is this locator called as ID which accepts a string value of ID, right? And I'll say by dot ID double quotes the ID value, which is password in this case. And then instead of storing this in a web element object and then using dot send keys, I might as well use send keys here directly. Okay, so I would say some value here, right? So basically what I've done is, instead of doing this in two steps, I've done it in one step itself. Okay, this is also perfectly fine, right? So this one, the first approach where I store it in an object first and then I use the object, is useful when you want to interact with this particular object multiple times. Okay, meaning I have saved this object to this particular obj user id, and then I can use obj user id dot send keys or whatever multiple times, right? But let's say I don't save it like this one, right? And if I have to use it multiple times, then I have to copy paste this entire, lengthy line those many number of times. So, in order to in order to make the code very nice, short, and good looking, you can use this obj user id first, and then you can use obj user id dot send keys. Okay, but this makes sense only if you want to use it multiple times. But since I know, I'm going to enter the password only once, so I might as well directly use dot send keys to the find element method. Both of them works fine. It is up to the user discretion how he or she wants to write the code. Okay. So once that is done, before that, I would also like to tell you that there are these couple of methods which are very useful, uh, you know, which you should use before you actually interact with that object. Meaning, before I enter the username in that edit box, or before I click on a particular button, right? It is always a good practice to check whether that button is displayed or not. So whether it actually exists on the application or not, whether it is enabled or not, right? And then you can, you know, add value to the text box, or you can click on the button. If the button itself is not present on the application, and if you try to click on that button, it is going to throw you an error and your execution will come to a hard stop, right? So it is always recommended that you first check whether that object is displayed, right? So what I would say is, if obj user id dot is displayed, okay, if is displayed true, right, then check whether obj user id is enabled, correct? So if it is displayed, but if it is not enabled, it is disabled. So you cannot click or you cannot add text to it, right? So only when these two things are true, then go ahead and send keys, or add the text that you want. And you can say else, I would say sysout object is not enabled, or yeah, object is not enabled, correct? So these are the very two important methods that you should use. Ideally in the framework, these are handled in itself. Okay, so when we will start our session on designing a framework, we will see how these methods are configured, and you need not always write these two statements. So whenever you use dot send keys or something similar to that, automatically these two checks would happen in background, and you can go ahead and you know directly use these methods, send keys or dot click or whatever. Okay, but for now I just wanted to show you that these two methods are available and it is good to use them. Okay, so yeah, so after entering the username and password, I want to click on the login button, right? So just click on login button, inspect on it first, correct? Okay, let me. You can also inspect an element like this by clicking on this icon and then clicking on the object you want to inspect, and it will highlight that HTML tag for you. So now here there is this button which has the visible text or the text as login, correct? So I will show you another locator which we can use, or not locator, basically another way of writing an XPath. So I will say driver dot find element by dot. Okay, so we have seen ID, we have seen XPath. Uh, let's see. Yeah, so I would go with XPath, and I would say here or let me write the XPath here to confirm that the XPath what I'm writing is correct or not. So I would say button text equal to, yeah. So let me zoom in for you to see what I've written. So two forward slashes, HTML tag button, in square bracket I've mentioned text, open and close round bracket, equal to, in single quotes, the text value, which is nothing but login, right? So this is also one way of writing XPath if you are sure that the text value that is displayed is unique. Okay, and I would say dot click, right? This would click on the login button. Obviously, is displayed, is enabled, should be used for all the statements, but for saving time, I'm not doing that. But you can go ahead and use it always. Okay, so I will save this, and before that, probably I would also like to see if I can show you how to validate. Uh, okay, 1 second. Let me log out first. User 123. Yeah. So if I enter an incorrect username or password, I'm getting this validation message, right? So if I want to validate this error message, again inspect, you come to this particular line, and now again using XPath, I would say, okay, let me come back. Yeah, so what is the HTML tag? HTML tag is P, right? And here I would say if that particular validation message contains a substring called as invalid, then my test case pass, right? So I would say contains, okay, text invalid, and you see this XPath works. So here what I've done is I've I've used this contains keyword to validate the text contains a specific substring or not. Okay, so I'm not validating the entire text end to end. I'm just validating certain substring within that text. Okay, so this is another way of writing an XPath. So I'm trying to show you as many different ways you can write XPath. So one is for using the attribute ID and the value. Then we have, you know, using the text. Here I validate the entire text end to end. And here I would say driver dot find element by dot XPath, and I will copy paste the XPath using the contains keyword, and I would say is displayed. Okay, and I would say here if this particular method is displayed returns true, then I would say validation message is displayed, else validation message is not displayed. Okay, so now since I want to validate uh, an invalid credential, right? So I would just make this password incorrect for now and see if this works as expected. So let me execute this. So login page has been launched. Username. Okay. So it has failed. I know the reason why. So it says the button ID login, that particular button, the element click was intercepted. Okay. So as you could, as you must have seen when the browser launched, you know, the button was not visible. Although it is displayed on the page, it is there. The page does contain this button, but since it is not visible to click on it because of these ads or whatever, or maybe even the button might be somewhere down below the page, right, on the bottom side of the page, still it would have given you this error. So there is a way to handle such scenarios. Again, that is a little advanced topic where you have to scroll to a particular page so that uh, that object that you want to interact with is visible. Okay, so that comes with, I believe, an action class. So that I would cover, sometime later, right? So that would solve this problem. Okay, but for now, what I would do is once this page is loaded, I will manually scroll it down so that this login button is visible, and then it should work fine. Okay, so let me re-execute this. Okay, let me, yeah. So now it will enter the username, entered the password, clicked on login button, and you know it has hopefully validated the message as well. Okay, so I'm getting a message saying unable to locate. All right, why is it not working? I think this is again a synchronization issue, because after this click it is immediately trying to validate whether this is displayed or not, right? So let me add, maybe 3 seconds should suffice, so 3000 milliseconds. So guys, these errors that we get, you should not be scared of getting these errors. In fact, you learn a lot of things when you get these exceptions or errors, right? So you need to know how to read that exception. You should always read that exception message correctly, and you should get an idea, uh, okay, on how to fix it, you know, by reading the message itself. Okay, let me rerun because I forgot to scroll down. Okay, so now it has worked fine, and it has said validation message is displayed. Correct. So here we saw two exceptions. One was the login page was intercepted by some other object, or that particular login button was not visible on the screen. It was somewhere below, right? So what I told you is that there is one option to do that using action class. We will see that in subsequent sessions. But for now, what we did is we just manually scrolled it down so that it is visible, and Selenium was able to click on it. The next thing that we saw was that while validating that error message, although the XPath what we have written was correct, but you know the login button click and validating this is displayed method, it happened so fast that within a fraction of a second that error message was coming up, but still the execution was so fast that it did not wait for that fraction of second as well, and that is why it was giving us an error saying that this web element is not displayed. So when we added a synchronization over here using thread.sleep, you know, it was able to validate this message as well using the dot is displayed method, right? So we saw now how to interact with input box, how to interact with a button. Image and link are again similar because it involves mostly clicking on an image and clicking on a link, right? So you can use the same method dot click for both of them. Uh, for a link, probably what uh, the difference would be in using the locator is that, let's say there is a link with the name as, let me see if there is any link over here, elements, links, right? Okay, so let me launch this URL and show you about links, right? So I would say this, I'll comment out the rest of the stuff, and here, as you can see, there are multiple links. Okay, so this one is a link. If you inspect it, you will see home as the text of this particular link. So how do you understand this is a link? Is by the HTML tag which says A. Okay, so link will always have an HTML tag as A. Okay, so now there is this locator which says driver.find element by dot link text. Okay, so link text, the text that we have seen on the HTML element was home, right? So I've used that value as home and I would say dot click. Okay, so it would click on it. Similarly, if you want to click on the other link which says whatever, right? Uh, inspect. Let's see if I mention the other value 5CFCO or KO, right? Let's see if it works. Or let me inspect this one. Yeah, yeah. Let me try this URL, link instead, no content. And what I would do is, instead of using the entire text, I would just use the partial link text. Okay, so I've used just content, all right, and I would say driver dot find element by dot partial link text, and I will mention the link partial link text, whatever value that you have copied, and I would say click. Okay, so this particular link, the first one which you would click, it would actually navigate you to a different tab. Okay, so we will see how do we manage you know multiple tabs or multiple windows in some other session, but for now just try to see how this link works. Okay, so we will see this one by one. Let me first comment the second line of the link click. So first we will see how it works using link text. All right, let me execute this. Okay, so it has clicked on the first URL, first link, home, and it has executed successfully, right? Now let us run the second way using the partial link text. Let me execute this now and see if the partial link text method works fine for clicking the link. Okay, yeah, so it has, I believe, clicked on it. We have no errors as such. If you want, let me add one statement over here. Clicked using partial link text. Okay, and probably let me add a wait here so that we can see that it has actually clicked on it or not. Alright, so now we will execute this. It has clicked on no content. It has said clicked using partial link text and it has executed fine. Okay, so the link and the partial link text works absolutely fine. So you might wonder why clicking on this, it didn't navigate me to any other page, is because these links are designed that way that it will actually send an API call. It will not navigate you to any other page, right? But at least you saw that it was able to click on it, and it has also reported that using the system.out.println it has clicked. Okay. The intention was to show you how you can use this locator as by.linkText and by.partial link text in order to interact with links. Okay, so with this we have covered input box, button, image, and link. Now let's quickly see the checkbox and radio button, and then we will end today's session. So let's first check the radio button, right? So here I will use this URL. Okay, so again I will replace the URL here and let me comment out the rest of the stuff. If I have to click on, let's say, this radio button, impressive. Okay, so let's click on it, and you see here this is the HTML line that it is getting highlighted. Okay, ideally for clicking a radio button, we use this input tag to interact with it. But sometimes what happens is that the label tag is used for clicking on the radio button or checkbox. Okay, but we will see both ways. We will first see whether this input HTML tag works fine for clicking or not. If it gives an error, we will see what that error is, and based on that, we will change our code. Okay, so this is just kind of a you know uh, disclaimer that I'm giving, because I have used this particular page, so I know, in my previous interaction on this particular object, it didn't work with this input tag. So I had to use this label tag instead, and it was working fine. Okay, anyways, so let's start with first the input tag and see if this will click on it. So I would say driver dot find element by dot id. uh, Okay, by.id. Yeah, by.id, right? So by.id impressive radio, correct? So I will use this and I would say dot click. Okay, let's see if this works or not. Okay, and let me comment out driver dot close so that we can use the same page in case we want to spy or inspect. Okay, I've executed this. Hmm. I think it has given an error because it has not clicked on it. Now let's see what is the error. So here it says again the same thing, element click intercepted. So now you might wonder, now this page, the radio button is not somewhere in the bottom side of the page, nor there is any object that is, overlapping this. At least visibly, it is not overlapping it, right? So what could be the issue? So let's learn to read the exception message, what it says. So first of all, we have understood that this particular element click has been intercepted, and it has been intercepted by what? Element input type radio, blah 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 blah, is not clickable at a point. Other element would receive the click. It says other element would receive the click. What is that other element? The element which has the label tag, right? This for attribute and the value impressive radio. Okay, so we have read this message correctly, and now we will see what needs to be done. So what basically that exception message is saying is that this label, this for impressive radio, is kind of intercepting the message, intercepting the click that we are trying to perform on this input tag. Okay, so now what I'll do instead is that I would try to click on this label tag instead of this input one, and I think that should solve the problem. So instead of buy.id, I would say buy.xpath, okay, and I would say label, right, at the rate attribute for equal to, okay. So let me just copy paste and see if this xpath what I've written is correct or not. Uh, yeah, it is correct, right? So now let us execute this and see if it is working fine. You see, it has clicked on the radio button now, and it is working as expected. All right. Now, what I would do now is, let's say I want to check whether that radio button is actually selected or not. Okay. So I have clicked on it and I want to check whether it has been selected or not. How do I do it? I can do it by using a method called as any guesses is selected. Okay. So is selected, if this is returning true, that means radio button has been selected. Okay, else radio button has not been selected. Okay, when do we use this? Is that it makes more sense when we use checkboxes. I'll tell you how when I'll cover the checkboxes in some time. But let's execute this and see what is the message that it displays. Okay, so
will wait for some time, for 5 seconds. It will click on impressive, and then it will validate whether it has been selected or not. So if you see on the console, it says radio button has not been selected. Wow. Okay, again, I think it is again, it's a synchronization issue. So let's wait for 5 more seconds, or maybe not five, 3 seconds should be enough. Okay. And yeah. Okay, so let's execute this one more time. Okay, so the execution is completed. Okay, okay. Yeah, I have understood why this is selected is not working as expected. This is because for some reason, okay, now this is a little crazy, but for some reason, if I want to click on the radio button, we have to use this label tag. And if I want to use the dot is displayed method, we have to use this input tag. Okay, I remember this issue. That is why I'm able to tell this so confidently. So let's check this. Okay, let's check this by dot id. Sorry, by dot id. Okay, double quotes. All right. Yeah. So now this should work absolutely fine, and we should now get the message as radio button has been selected. Okay, let's confirm this. All right. So now let's see what is displayed on the console. Yeah, here you go. It says radio button has been selected. Okay. So this is a very rare scenario where we get a radio button with these two tags, input and label. Ideally it should get only as one tag, input, but it's good to know we have some scenarios like this as well, so you can handle it better. So what we have seen is that to click on the radio button, we were using this label tag, and to check whether this has been really been selected or not, correct, to use this dot is selected method, we had to use the input tag, using the attribute id, and it was working fine. All right, so let's quickly see the checkbox, and we will end today's session with this. Okay, so we will launch this checkbox URL, and we will, or I might as well launch this form, a practice form. This is a good one to practice. It has almost all the elements we may need to practice. Okay, so here we have this one checkbox, right? Sports. So if I want to select this sports, I have to click on it. And if I want to unselect, I again have to click on it, right? So for Selenium, if you want to click, if you want to select or unselect, there is just one method, that is dot click, right? So let's say this particular page is loaded by this particular checkbox is selected as default. Okay, so the page comes loaded with this checkbox already selected. So now if your test case says that you need to select this checkbox, right? So ideally what you would do is you would mention, the attribute of this particular checkbox and you would say dot click. Okay. But what you would be doing in reality is that you are unselecting that checkbox. Why? Because it has already been selected and you have used the dot click method hoping that you would select that checkbox, but in reality you are unselecting that checkbox. Correct? So this is selected method is ideally used for the checkboxes to check before you click on it whether it has been already selected or not. So if your test case says that select this checkbox, first thing that you need to do is you need to check whether this has been already selected by default or not. If it is already selected, then you need not click on it because it has been selected by default. If it is not selected by default, then you go ahead and click on it. Okay, I hope you're getting my point. I will show you anyways. So again, here we have this label and input, right? So as per our previous experience, right? As per our previous experience, we would be using the label tag for clicking on it and the input tag for validating the is selected method. Okay, so let's very quickly do that. For clicking, the label tag, what is the value? Hobbies checkbox, right? And for validating the is selected method, you will use the input tag id attribute and you will say checkbox has been selected, checkbox has not been selected. Okay, so if it is selected, let's say if it is selected, you don't have to click on it, else you can say click on it. You're getting my point? So I would say here, if is selected is returns false, then in the else statement, mention that checkbox to be clicked. Okay, so now let's see, I'll execute this. So it has selected and it has completed the execution. So it says checkbox has been selected, right? So this is how you work with checkboxes as well, right? So we have covered quite a few topics for today. Tomorrow we will cover drop down, web table, alert, and frames. Thank you so much, and we will